Have you ever stopped to wonder if the silence within your own mind is actually a crowded room, filled with voices and impulses that never truly belong to you? We often take for granted that our thoughts are our private property, generated in the secret chambers of our brains. But what if the reality of your inner life is far more porous than you have been led to believe? Imagine for a moment that your consciousness is not a fortress, but a radio receiver, constantly vibrating to frequencies emitted by entities you cannot see, yet you helped build with every moment of your attention. We are entering the territory of the invisible architects, those ancient and modern forces known as egregores. These are autonomous thought forms born from the synchronized emotional energy of the collective, and they currently possess the power to dictate the boundaries of your physical reality. This is not a journey into superstition, but a descent into the hidden physics of the soul. We are here to uncover how shared obsessions crystallize into sentient structures that exert a tangible, often terrifying influence over the world you touch and breathe in every day. Is humanity the sovereign master of consciousness, or have we merely become the life support system for psychic entities that now govern our culture, our markets, and our very identities? This video is not just an exploration, it is a field manual for the modern seeker. We will provide you with the map to navigate this unseen landscape, showing you how to distinguish between the parasitic currents that drain your spirit and the sacred fields that offer genuine elevation. As we peel back the veil, you will discover that once a collective idea reaches a critical mass, it begins to act in its own self-interest, manipulating the behavior of the very people who gave it life. We will investigate the threshold where a simple cultural trend transforms into an active psychological force, exploring how modern systems have become synthetic incubators for these entities. By the time we are finished, you will not only understand the hidden architecture of reality, but you will hold the key to reclaiming your own mind from the shadows of the construct. The hunt for the truth behind the invisible masters begins now. Everything you perceive as a solid, unchangeable fact of your life might actually be the shadow cast by a massive collective mental projection. If we are to understand how the world truly operates, we must first learn to see the invisible threads of influence that link your heartbeat to the heartbeat of the masses. The architecture of your reality is shifting, and it is time to find out who or what is really holding the blueprint. To understand how an idea becomes a living force, we must first look at the world through a lens that traditional science often neglects. The visionary Pierre Teilhard de Chardin once proposed that just as the Earth is wrapped in a biosphere, a layer of living things, it also possesses a noosphere, a planetary layer of human thought and consciousness. Imagine this noosphere as a vast, swirling atmosphere of mental energy, a psychic weather system that surrounds the globe. Every prayer, every marketing campaign, every whispered fear, and every silent devotion contributes a vapor to this atmosphere. Usually, these thoughts are fleeting and dissipate like mist in the morning sun. But when millions of people begin to think the same thought, with the same burning emotional intensity, that mist begins to condense. It becomes a cloud, then a storm, and eventually it crystallizes into what the ancient occult traditions called an egregore. An egregore is a non-physical entity, born from the synchronized emotional energy of a group. It is a collective mind that possesses its own survival instinct, a psychic field that, once it reaches a certain density, begins to function as an autonomous being. In the ancient world, this was understood as a profound and sacred science. When the master builders of Egypt or the architects of the great European cathedrals began their work, they were not just piling stones upon stones, they were creating a physical anchor for a luminous egregore. They sought to create a specific space where the collective devotion of the faithful would crystallize into a field of peace and transcendence. These were egregores designed to refine the soul, acting as a bridge between the mundane world of the senses and the divine world of the spirit. They were the temples in man, as the philosopher Schwaller de Lubitsch described them, structures that reflected the harmony of the cosmos to help the individual transcend the noise of the ego. In those times, these psychic fields were guarded by rigorous ritual and deep tradition, kept carefully within the bounds of the sacred. But the nature of these entities changed as we drifted into the modern era and the rise of the machine. Today we live in an age of hyper-synchronized digital culture, where our collective attention is captured and amplified by algorithms. These algorithms act as synthetic incubators for thought forms, accelerating the growth of collective entities at a speed and scale that our ancestors could never have imagined. Unlike the sacred fields of the past, these modern entities are often born from the lowest common denominators of human experience, such as outrage, fear, or the relentless pursuit of material consumption. They are what we might call archontic egregores, fields that feed on the volatility of the ego and trap the human spirit in a loop of reaction and desire. Think of an egregore as a giant psychic battery that requires constant attention to survive. Just as a fire needs a steady supply of oxygen, an egregore needs the synchronized focus of human minds to maintain its coherence. Once an egregore reaches a critical mass, it stops being a passive reflection of our collective thoughts and starts to influence them directly. It creates a feedback loop that borders on the sentient. It begins to suggest specific ideas and emotions to the individuals within its sphere of influence, ensuring that they continue to feed it the energy it needs for its own continued existence. Have you ever noticed how, within certain movements or internet trends, everyone begins to use the same vocabulary, adopt the same body language, and feel the same specific brand of anger? This is the signature of an egregore at work. It is narrowing the spectrum of your acceptable thought to keep you tethered to its own frequency. This brings us to a realization that is both terrifying and necessary for our awakening, which is that much of what we call our personality or our private opinions might actually be the cravings of these invisible entities we helped create. We have become like cells in a larger, unseen body, and that body has its own agenda that often contradicts our individual well-being. Egregores are not a supernatural anomaly. They are a fundamental part of the fabric of reality, as inherent to the mental world as gravity is to the physical world. They are the fields of consciousness energy that govern the movements of history, the rise of civilizations, and the growth of the human soul. The question for the mystery hunter is not how to live without these fields, for they are woven into the very nature of our social and spiritual existence. Even the most solitary hermit is still breathing the air of the noosphere. The question is whether we are sustaining entities that fragment our spirit and tether us to the low vibration interests of manipulation, or whether we are congregating our souls in those vast, ancient, and harmonious cosmovisions that have served as shelters for the spirit for millennia. The architecture of reality is shifting beneath our feet because we have forgotten that we are the architects. We have allowed the tools of our connection to become the masters of our perception. To reclaim our sovereignty, we must first understand the mechanics of how these fields exert their pressure on the physical world. How does a silent belief transition from a passive idea into an active psychological power that can bend the material world to its will? The boundary between the thought and the thing is much thinner than you have been told, and it is at this threshold that the true power of the egregore is revealed. It is time to look at the mechanics of material influence and see how the invisible dictates the boundaries of the visible. To understand how these invisible architectures begin to exert a tangible pressure on our physical world, we must look at the exact threshold where an idea ceases to be a passive thought and becomes an active psychological force. Imagine for a moment a single person standing in a large, quiet room, humming a single note. It is a small sound, fragile and easily ignored by the vastness of the space. But now imagine 10,000 people standing in that same room, humming that same note in perfect resonant unison. The floor beneath your feet begins to vibrate. The glass in the windows rattles in its frame, and the very air becomes thick with a frequency that can be felt in the marrow of your bones. This is the transition from a solitary thought to a collective field. In the realm of the noosphere, this vibration is what we call resonance. When millions of minds are synchronized through the same fear, the same hope, or the same digital trend, they create a resonant field that is no longer a metaphor. It is a functional engine of reality that can influence physical systems. The mechanics of material influence operate through a subtle but relentless narrowing of the spectrum of human possibility. An egregore does not usually move mountains by raw physical force. It moves them by moving the hands of those who believe the mountains should be moved. It acts as a selective filter for your perception. When you are tethered to a specific collective thought form, your brain literally begins to filter out data that contradicts the entity's survival. If the egregore is built on a narrative of scarcity and conflict, you will find evidence of scarcity in every shadow and conflict in every conversation. If it is built on a narrative of divine order and compassion, Your eyes will be opened to the myriad ways the universe supports and sustains life. This is the first practical law of the mystery hunter, which is that you do not see the world as it is. You see the world as the egregore you inhabit allows you to see it. Our reality is a participatory mirror, reflecting back the density of our shared beliefs. This brings us to a critical distinction that determines the very quality of our existence: the difference between archontic and luminous egregores. Not all collective fields are created equal. Some are designed to serve as cages for the human spirit, while others are built to serve as cathedrals for its expansion. The archontic egregore is essentially a parasitic construct. It is born from the lower impulses of the ego, such as the need for tribal superiority, the hunger for material accumulation, the addiction to outrage, and the deep-seated fear of the other. These entities are the unseen rulers of the modern age, the forces that hollow out our ancient institutions and replace them with the hollow shells of ideology. They feed on the volatile energy of conflict. When you find yourself in a state of high-stress reaction to a news cycle or a social media debate, you are likely being harvested by an archontic field. Its primary goal is to keep you in a state of psychic dissolution, where your individual sovereignty is lost to the mindless emotional roar of the crowd. On the other hand, we have the luminous egregores. These are the vast, ancient reservoirs of wisdom and grace that have been carefully cultivated by humanity over countless centuries. When we speak of the great spiritual traditions, such as the contemplative heart of Christianity, the deep resonant silence of Buddhism, or the precise mathematical metaphysics of the Vedic texts, we are speaking of egregores that were specifically designed to refine the soul. These fields do not feed on your energy. Instead, they provide a structure for your energy to rise. They are like a trellis that allows a vine to grow toward the sun, providing support without stifling life. A luminous egregore is characterized by a process of coming together into a higher, more harmonious form. It provides a cosmovision that anchors the individual in a sense of timeless meaning, protecting the heart from the chaotic and often predatory winds of the profane world. These are the fields that save lives, providing a moral and spiritual gravity that keeps us from drifting into the abyss of nihilism. So how does this manifest in your daily life on an ordinary morning? The application of this knowledge begins with the development of what we might call psychic taste. You must learn to sense the flavor of the field you are entering before you fully commit your attention to it. Every time you open your phone, every time you walk into your workplace, and every time you engage in a heated conversation, you are crossing a threshold into a specific egregore. You must ask yourself a series of silent questions. Does this field make me feel more expanded, more compassionate, and more connected to a higher order of reality? Or does it make me feel contracted, defensive, and strangely superior to those around me? The sensation of a sudden contraction in the solar plexus is often the first warning sign that you are being tethered to an archontic thought form. It is the physical feeling of being hooked by a narrative that requires your anger or your anxiety to stay alive. The second practical step in this mastery is the act of intentional anchoring. The philosopher Shvala de Lubitsch taught that the ancient Egyptians understood the temple as a living organism that reflected the cosmic man. You can build such a temple within your own daily routine. By dedicating time each day to the study of sacred texts, to silent contemplation, or to acts of selfless service, you are choosing to anchor your consciousness in a luminous field. You are voluntarily entering an ancient, high-frequency egregore that has been built by the devotions of millions of souls over thousands of years. This acts as a form of psychic immunization. When your internal world is anchored in the vastness of a spiritual tradition, the low-vibration trends and digital hysterias of the modern world find no place to take root within you. They pass through your mind like ghosts, because you no longer share the same density or the same hunger as the entities that drive them. Imagine that every thought of yours is a drop of water. In isolation, that drop evaporates without a trace. But when a system, whether it is a social network or a political movement, forces millions of people to pour their drops into the same bucket at the same time, it creates a hydraulic pressure capable of breaking the floodgates of physical reality. The first sign that you are being dragged along by an archontic egregore is the disappearance of your individual critical sense in favor of a collective emotion. Modern digital bubbles are not just software algorithms. They are the circulatory systems of egregores of indignation. When you feel that almost uncontrollable urge to comment, attack, or defend an idea that 5 minutes ago was not even a part of your life, you are not acting on your own will. You are serving as a temporary neuron for an entity that feeds on your stress. These archontic egregores function as energetic parasites. They do not want you to solve the problem. They want you to feel the problem forever, for your distress is their primary source of nourishment. In direct contrast, consider the majesty of a luminous egregore, like the one that has sustained the heart of great spiritual traditions for centuries. These are not just human institutions, they are morphic resonance fields that preserve a frequency of peace and order, even in times of absolute chaos. When you enter a cathedral or sit in a silent meditation hall, you are accessing a bank deposit of trillions of hours of prayer and meditation accumulated by generations of seekers. This is where the law of correspondence becomes a lived experience, for as your mind tunes to these fields, your physical body begins to reflect that higher order. Modern science is beginning to observe this through the study of heart rate variability and brainwave coherence. To be under the influence of a luminous egregore is like being in a room with a perfect tuning fork. Eventually, the strings of your own soul begin to vibrate at the same divine note, bringing harmony to your health, your relationships, and your sense of purpose. But how can we practice the psychic hygiene necessary to avoid being devoured by lower egregores in such a connected world? The practice begins with the guardianship of the heart. In your daily life, this translates into creating zones of absolute, intentional silence. The archontic egregore hates silence because it is in the vacuum of stimuli that your real self awakens and realizes it is being manipulated. Try this exercise every morning. Before touching any digital device or consuming any news, stay for 10 minutes in contemplation of a transcendental idea, such as the nature of beauty, the concept of eternity, or the presence of the divine. By doing this, you are establishing your own frequency signature for the day. You are telling the noosphere that you are a conscious architect of your own space, not a battery available for any passing current. We must also consider the phenomenon of meaningful synchronicity. When you are deeply anchored in a high-vibration egregore, the physical world often seems to conspire in your favor in ways that defy logical explanation. Carl Jung observed that external events tend to align with our internal state when our consciousness is in a state of harmony. This happens because the luminous egregore acts as a path corrector, smoothing the edges of material reality to allow the soul to fulfill its deeper purpose. On the other hand, being stuck in an egregore of conflict and resentment attracts accidents, arguments, and constant blocks in your path. The world out there is, in fact, the feedback system of the egregore you are currently inhabiting. If you want to change your reality, you must first change the field you are feeding. Where can we see these principles in action today? Look at great movements of collective healing or communities that unite around ideals of beauty and absolute truth. These communities create a psychic wall that protects their members from cultural degeneration. They are not just sharing information, they are maintaining a flame in a collective energy field that provides warmth and light to all who enter. The practical application of this is to deliberately choose your congregations. Who do you speak to regularly? What books do you allow to populate your mind? What kind of art do you consume when you are alone? Each of these choices is a vote for the egregore you want to strengthen. If you consume narratives of fear and division, you are building your own prison. If you consume perennial wisdom and cultivate compassion, you are building your own temple. The challenge of our era is that we are no longer just fighting for physical resources. We are fighting for the very frequency of our souls. The egregores are all around us, invisible and all-encompassing, like the water a fish swims in. Most people spend their entire lives being pushed and pulled by these currents, never realizing that the voice in their head is often just the echo of the group they unknowingly belong to. The first step toward genuine freedom is the silence. In the silence, you can begin to hear the difference between the noisy, demanding ego of the collective and the quiet, steady pulse of your own eternal soul. It is in that silence that you gain the power to choose your anchor. Will you choose the field that demands your rage, or the field that invites your peace? Will you feed the entity that divides, or the tradition that congregates? The architecture of the future is being built in this very moment, thought by thought, focus by focus. The question is whether you are the architect or merely the building material being used by a force you do not understand. If the goal of life is to learn how to navigate the infinite landscape of consciousness, then identifying the egregores that govern our world is the most important fieldwork we can ever do. We are entering a time where the invisible and the visible are merging, where our collective beliefs are becoming the literal boundaries of what we perceive as possible. It is time to wake up to the power of the field and reclaim the blueprints of our shared reality. As we reach the final summit of our journey, we must confront the most challenging question of all, which is whether it is truly possible to be free, or if we are destined to forever be the residents of one field or another. If the world is a complex tapestry of overlapping egregores, then the dream of absolute isolated independence might be the ultimate illusion. Yet throughout the long history of human consciousness, there have been accounts of those who seem to walk through the world without being of it, moving through the noise without letting the noise take root in their hearts. These are the figures we call the avatars, the superior humans who have performed the rarest of all alchemical feats, which is the total transcendence of the collective field. To understand the nature of the avatar, we must first realize that the ordinary human condition is almost entirely a state of being lived by external forces. Most people are like musical instruments being played by the invisible hands of the cultures, ideologies, and digital trends they inhabit. But the superior human is the one who has turned their gaze inward with such relentless intensity that they have discovered the source of the frequency itself. This is a person who has seen the wires of the noosphere. They do not merely choose a better egregore, they have reached a state of consciousness that is so vast and so silent that no collective thought form, no matter how powerful, can find a hook within them. They are like a perfect mirror that reflects every field it passes through, but is colored or stained by none. This level of mastery is not a matter of intellectual study or academic knowledge, but of a profound and often painful metaphysical shift. It requires the total dissolution of the lower ego, for it is the ego that serves as the primary doorway for the egregore to enter. The ego craves belonging, it craves the safety of the group, and it craves the intoxicating feeling of being right or superior. These are the very hooks that both archontic and even luminous egregores use to tether us to their service. The avatar, by contrast, has moved beyond the need for collective validation. They have found what some ancient traditions call the diamond body, or the self that is not a self. This is not a state of cold isolation, but a state of total immersion in the reality of the present moment, free from the filtered narratives and recycled emotions of the group mind. It is a cosmic anomaly that reminds us of the true untapped potential of the human spirit. For the rest of us, who are still navigating the swirling and often confusing currents of the noosphere, there is a different but equally profound realization to consider. What if you, as an individual, are actually your own kind of egregore? Consider the possibility that your soul is not a static object, but a dynamic and evolving field of energy. Throughout your entire life, your recurring thoughts, your deepest memories, and your most secret devotions have crystallized into a unique psychic structure. This is your individual egregore, the subtle body that persists through the chaos of material existence. The philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin suggested that the evolution of the noosphere is moving toward a point of ultimate convergence, a state he called the omega point. In this vision, the purpose of our lives is to refine our individual fields so that they can eventually harmonize with the ultimate field of the cosmos without losing their unique, hard-won essence. Now, we arrive at the deepest point of our hunt, the place where mystery folds upon itself to reveal a truly mind-bending truth. We have spoken of egregores as fields we inhabit, as constructs built by the thoughts of the past. But let us look closer at the nature of time itself. What if the most powerful egregores, those we call divinities, guardian angels, or spiritual guides, are not constructions of our ancestors, but echoes of a future humanity that has already reached perfection? This is the revelation of the future retrograde. Imagine for a moment that the noosphere does not operate only in linear time from past to future. What we call divine inspiration or a sacred presence might be the final egregore of humanity, the completed omega point, sending signals back through time to help us navigate the labyrinth of the present. In this view, when you connect to a luminous egregore, you are not just honoring the dead, you are being pulled forward by your own transcendent future. The implications of this are breathtaking and demand a complete re-evaluation of our inner lives. If we are the weavers of these entities, then our ethical responsibility does not end with our physical actions in the world. It begins in our most intimate and private thoughts. Every thought of hate or resentment you nurture is a brick in the construction of a collective demon that tomorrow might oppress an innocent person on the other side of the world. Conversely, every thought of genuine forgiveness or quiet compassion is a ray of light in an egregore that could save a life in a moment of utter despair. There is no such thing as a truly private thought. In the resonant field of the noosphere, all thoughts are public and all thoughts are productive. We are constantly contributing to the psychic weather that everyone else has to breathe. Waking up to this reality changes everything about how we move through the world. You stop being a victim of external circumstances and you become an engineer of consciousness. But here lies the final cosmic dilemma, the challenge that separates the casual seeker from the true master of the self. Ancient wisdom tells us that the human condition is inherently, perhaps even biologically, connected to these collective fields. To try to live without any egregore at all is like trying to live in a physical body without an atmosphere to breathe. However, the invitation of this mystery hunt is not for you to become a hollow vacuo, but for you to become a master of your own synthesizer zone. It is the final paradox of freedom, which is that we are truly free only when we consciously choose which force field we want to belong to. We are always servants of something larger than ourselves. The only real question is whether we will be servants of the collective ego that consumes us, or servants of the cosmic order that sets us free. It is said that the greatest secret of the ancients was not how to perform dramatic miracles, but how to live in such perfect harmony with the invisible laws of the universe that miracles became a natural and inevitable byproduct of existence. The egregore is the law of that harmony. Your heart is the altar where that law is enacted, and the noosphere is the vast battlefield where the soul decides its own eternal destiny. Where does your individual thought end, and where does the influence of the invisible world begin? Perhaps the ultimate answer is not something to be found in a book or a lecture, but something to be lived in the profound silence between one breath and another. As you return to the light of your daily life, take this question with you as a companion. If you were the only person responsible for sustaining the egregore of humanity, using only your thoughts from this single day, would the world become a place of paralyzing fear or a place of breathtaking wonder? The architecture of reality is, quite literally, in your hands and in your mind. Use that power with a sense of sacred wisdom. If this journey through the unseen layers of our reality has resonated with you, consider subscribing to our channel so we can continue to hunt these deep mysteries together. This has been our exploration into the invisible architects that shape our world, a blend of documented philosophical history and the tantalizing possibilities of the great esoteric traditions. What do you think about the power of the collective mind? Are we the masters of these thought forms, or are they mastering us? We would love to hear your reflections in the comments below. And remember, that's our hunt for now, a wild mix of documented history and tantalizing what-ifs based on bibliographical sources. What you do with this knowledge is the next step in your own journey. Keep your eyes open for the signs and your mind ready for the revelation. Until our next hunt.